Hi, welcome to part 4 in our subunit related to Egyptian art. In this segment, we're going to be looking at Egyptian architecture, in particular from the Old Kingdom. So ancient Egyptians believed an essential part of every human was its life force, or soul, called the Ka, spelled Ka, which lived on after death. The Ka needs a body to live in, either a mummified body of the deceased or a substitute sculpted likeness in the form of statues. So we looked at a few of those um, in our last segment. Egyptians developed an elaborate funerary practice to ensure their deceased moved safely into the afterlife. It is especially important to provide a comfortable home for the Ka spirit to live in. Probably the now familiar pyramid shape developed gradually over a long period of time. The Egyptians buried their dead in hidden pits and piled sand and stone over the top, and piled sand and stone over the top. Later, this practice changed, and they began to use sun-dried bricks to build mastabas. A mastaba is a low, flat tomb, and so that's what you're looking at right now in the diagrams. Mastaba is spelled M-A-S-T-A-B-A. These rectangular tombs had sloping sides and contained a chapel and a false burial chamber, in addition to the true one hidden deep inside. Um, there's serdab, a small sealed room within the mastaba, housed the Ka statue. So here you can see here. And so they're kind of similar to the ziggurats a little bit, but this is the beginning of the evolution of the pyramid. Mastabas might also contain numerous underground burial chambers to accommodate whole families. Mastabas tended to be grouped together in a necropolis, and that's spelled Necropolis. That's one of your vocabulary terms, and that basically means the city of the dead. So, in addition to building individual tombs, but they would actually kind of group these tombs together into these cities of the dead. So that's really how much preparation they thought about and did for their afterlife, and it was a lot. Several mastabas of diminishing size were stacked on top of each other to form a step pyramid. So you can kind of see here, this is what the mastaba looked like, and then gradually it's sort of like they started stacking these little, these mastabas on top of each other. And so this is actually a diagram of the step pyramid of King Dozier. And here's what it looks like today. The third dynasty, King Dozier, commissioned the earliest known monumental structure. The designer of the complex was named Imhotep, and he is considered the first architect to be identified in history. So the structure was situated on a level terrace where the final structure became a step pyramid formed by 6 mastaba-like elements of descending size stacked on top of each other. Again, this is very similar to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, but different in both purpose and meaning. So finally, these structures were built without steps, and a point was added to the top, where the true pyramid form, was complete. Thousands and thousands of paid workers and slaves toiled for decades to build a single pyramid. Limestone was quarried and dragged to the construction site and then carefully fitted into place. How the Egyptians managed to live and fit these huge blocks of stone, each averaging 2.5 tons, into the place remains unclear. Some scholars believe that the stones may have been dragged up ramps of earth and sand that were raised with each level of the structure. They believe that when finished, the pyramid was almost completely covered with sand. The final task then was to remove this sand, exposing the finished structure for the first time. So we're looking at the Great Pyramids of Giza. These are the last remaining of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and probably the most famous and discussed structures in history. These massive monuments were unsurpassed in height for thousands of years after their construction and continue to amaze and enthrall us with their overwhelming mass and seemingly impossible perfection. So there are three pyramids, which there were 3 rulers for each of them. The 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau were built over the span of 3 generations by the rulers um, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. And so Khafre and Menkaure, we looked at some of their statues. in the last segment. Each pyramid was part of a royal mortuary complex that also included a temple at its base and a long stone causeway and leading east from the plateau to a valley temple on the edge of the floodplain. So some scholars think that this might be a reference to the sun. The shape of the pyramid was a solar reference, perhaps intended as a solidified version of the rays of the sun. Texts talk about the sun's rays as a ramp the pharaoh mounted to climb to the sky. The earliest pyramids, such as the step pyramid of Djoser, were actually designed as a staircase. The pyramid was also clearly connected to the sacred Benben stone, an icon of the um, primeval, primeval mound that was considered the place of initial creation. The pyramid was considered a place of regeneration for the deceased ruler. We're looking at a kind of aerial floor plan of the three tombs. In addition to these major structures, several smaller pyramids belonging to queens are arranged as satellites, a major cemetery of smaller tombs, and these were in mastaba form, um, fill the area to the east and west of the pyramid of Khufu and were constructed in a grid-like pattern for prominent members of the court. Being buried near the pharaoh was a great honor and helped ensure a prized place in the afterlife. Again, many questions remain about the construction of these massive monuments, and theories abound as to the actual methods used. The workforce needed to build these structures is also still much discussed. Discovery of a town for workers to the south of the plateau has offered some answers. It is likely that there was a permanent group of skilled craftsmen and builders who were supplemented by seasonal crews of approximately 2,000 conscripted peasants. These crews were divided into gangs of 200 men, with each group further divided into teams of 20. Experiments indicate that these groups of 20 men could haul the 2.5-ton blocks from quarry to pyramid in about 20 minutes. Their path eased by some sort of lubricated surface of maybe like wet silt or slip. Um, an estimated 340 tons could be moved daily from the quarry to the construction site, particularly when one considered that many of the blocks, such as those in the upper levels, were considerably smaller. We're going to kind of look at some of the individual pyramids. The Great Pyramid, the largest of the three, was built by the pharaoh Khufu and rises to the height of 146 meters, which is about 481 feet, with a base length of more than 200 meters, 230 meters, 750 feet per side. The greatest difference in length among the four sides is a mere 4.4 centimeters, and the base is level within 2.1 centimeters, less than an inch. And so this is really demonstrating how astonishing their engineering was, and this really was an engineering accomplishment. An estimate 2,300,000 blocks, some of which were upwards of 50 tons, like the pyramids built by his predecessors and those that followed on the Giza Plateau. Khufu's pyramid is constructed of inner rough-hewn, locally quarried core stones, which is all we see today, and angled outer casting blocks laid in an even horizontal courses with spaces filled with gypsum plaster. The finer outer casing stones, which have long since been removed, were laid with great precision. These blocks of white Tura limestone would have given the pyramid a smooth surface and been quite bright and reflective. At the very top of the pyramid would have sat a capstone, and this is called pyramidion, Pyramidion. And this would be sort of this dazzling point. Shining in the intense sunlight would have been very visible from a great distance. So let's look at the interior a little bit. The interior chambers and passageways of Khufu's pyramid are unique and include a number of sort of mysterious features. There is an unfinished subterranean chamber whose function is mysterious, as well as a number of so-called air shafts that radiate out from the upper chambers. These have been recently explored using small robots, but a series of blocking stones have obscured the passages. When entering the pyramid, one has to crawl up a cramped ascending chamber that opens suddenly into a stunning grand gallery. This corbelled passage soars to a height of about 26 feet and leads up to the king's chamber, which is constructed entirely from red granite brought from the southern quarries at Aswan. And a corbelled is another type of architecture or way of expanding space, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it's sort of the kind of these stackings of stones, almost not quite an arch, but getting, kind of towards sort of an arch. And then these kind of diagonal stones that are sort of crossed or, set against each other at a diagonal are sort of held together by a capstone. So here's a diagram. Above the king's chamber are 5 stress-relieving chambers of massive granite blocks topped with immense cantilevered blocks forming a pent roof to distribute the weight of the mountain of masonry above it. The king's sarcophagus, this is kind of like a coffin, also carved from red granite, sits empty at the exact central axis of the pyramid. This burial chamber was sealed with a series of massive granite blocks and the entrance to the shaft filled with limestone in an effort to obscure the opening. So Khufu's mortuary complex also included several large boat pits. 5 of these are located to the east of the pyramid and were a sort of model. These brick-lined boat-shaped elements were probably intended for use in the afterlife to transport the king to stellar destinations. Boat burials and models of this type had a long history in royal mortuary contexts. A fleet of 14 such pits containing actual boats averaging 18 to 19 meters or 60 feet in length, encased inside, were discovered at a Dynasty I mortuary enclosure in Abydos, the cemetery of Egypt's earliest kings. Often, however, as with Khufu, the pits were simply boat-shaped models rather than containing actual boats. In addition to these model boat pits, however, on the south side of the pyramid, Khufu had 2 massive rectangular stone-lined pits that contained completely disassembled boats. One of these had been removed and reconstructed in a special museum on the south side of the pyramid. This cedar boat measures about 142 feet in length and was constructed of 1,224 separate pieces stitched together with rope. These boats appear to have been used for the funerary procession and as a ritual object connecting the sort of symbolizing the last earthly voyage of the king. And these boats were then dismantled and put into the tomb. So it's pretty amazing. I mean, again, there's a lot of preparation in terms of the afterlife. So the Egyptians really had a positive outlook on the afterlife. So the second Great Pyramid of Giza that was built by Khufu's second son, Khafre, had a section of outer casing that still survives at the very top and which would have entirely covered all 3 of the Great Pyramids at Giza. Although this monument appears larger than that of his father, it is actually slightly smaller, but was constructed about 33 feet higher on the plateau. The interior is much simpler than that of Khufu's pyramid, with a single burial chamber, 1 small subsidiary chamber, and 2 passageways. The mortuary temple at the pyramid base was also more complex than that of Khufu and would have filled and was filled with statuary of the king. Over 52 life-size or larger images originally filled the structure. Um, Khafre's Valley Temple, located at the east end of the causeway leading from the pyramid's base, is beautifully preserved. It was constructed of megalithic, and that means very, very large blocks sheathed with granite and floors of polished white calcite. statues' bases indicate that an additional 24 images of the pharaoh were originally located in this temple. Next to the causeway leading from Khafre's Valley Temple to the Mortuary Temple sits the first truly colossal sculpture in Egyptian history, the Great Sphinx. This close association indicates this massive depiction of a recumbent lion with the head of a king was carved for Khafre. The Sphinx is carved from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau, and it appears that the core blocks used to construct the Kings Valley Temple were quarried from the layers of stone that run along the upper side of this massive image. Look at a different one. So the lion was a royal symbol as well as being connected with the sun as a symbol of the horizon. The fusion of this powerful animal with the head of a pharaoh was an icon that survived and was often used throughout Egyptian history. The king's head is on a smaller scale than the body. This appears to have been due to a defect in the stone, a weakness recognized by the sculptors who compensated by elongating the body. So hopefully you can remember some other composite creatures that we looked at, in particular the Lamassu or the guardian figures in Mesopotamia culture that consisted of the body of a bull or horse um, and the face of a man and the wings of a bird. And so this is an example. This is the first statue we looked at of Khafre in our last segment. So the the pyramid and his tomb, would have been decorated and filled with similar statues such as this. The third of the major pyramids at Giza belonged to Menkora, and we saw a sculpture of him in our last segment. This is the smallest of the three, rising to the height of 65 meters or about 213 feet. But the complex preserves some of the most stunning examples of sculpture to survive from all of Egyptian history. Menkaura's pyramid chambers are more complex than those of Khafre and include a chamber carved with decorative panels and another chamber with 6 large niches. The burial chamber is lined with massive granite blocks. His black stone sarcophagus was carved within, also carved with niche panels, was discovered inside, but was lost at sea as it was being transported to England. We learned that in our last segment. Also within Menkaura's mortuary and valley temples, neither of which were connected before his death, excavation revealed a series of statues of the king, the stunning dyad, which we looked at in our last segment, of the king and his primary queen, um, as well as a number of triads showing, and this was figures of 3, showing the king being embraced by various deities who were discovered in the Valley Temple and were originally set up surrounding the open court. This temple was still an active place of cult ritual late into the Old Kingdom and was almost entirely rebuilt at the end of the 6th dynasty after it was heavily damaged by a flood. All right, so that concludes the Old Kingdom. In our next videos, we'll be looking at architecture, statues, and two-dimensional art from the New Kingdom. So stay tuned.